Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to kick us off. I see more people coming in, but we'll start bang on time. I hope everybody is doing well this afternoon. My name is Katie Jacobs from the CIPD, and welcome to the next webinar in our CIPD coronavirus webinar series. In today's session, we're going to be exploring what home working looks like when it is for the long term. We know that many organisations were forced to go remote pretty much overnight back in March. But now that government guidance has switched back to work from home if you can, many organisations are thinking about what home working looks like when it is less about crisis response and more about how we work for good. Now, we know that many people professionals have a lot of questions about what that means for things like contracts, allowances and reward, as well as things like culture, performance and development. And luckily, we have a really excellent panel on hand to offer some presentations and to discuss this timely and important topic. So I'm joined by Johnny Gifford. Johnny is Senior Advisor for Organisational Behaviour at the CIPD, and he's been leading on CIPD research projects around remote working and virtual teams. We have Alan Price, CEO of Bright HR, which offers HR software and support to SMEs. And Alan is our employee relations and legal expert on this session. And last but not least, Lee Lefevre-Ayer, Vice President of Human Resources at Enterprise. And she has experience in running remote teams, as many of Enterprise's colleagues have been entirely home-based for a number of years now. So thank you all very much for joining us today. As ever, I'm just going to do the housekeeping very quickly. The session is being recorded. It will be available to access afterwards, as will the slides. So you will be able to download those. We'll make them available either later on today or tomorrow. To submit questions, and please do, can I ask you to use the Q&A tab, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A tab if there's anything you want me to ask the panel, but do use the chat function to connect with each other and to share and learn. I can see people talking about the weather on there, which is brilliant. If you want to share anything about what your organisation is doing or any challenges, then please do that as well. Just remember to set it to go to all panellists and all attendees if you want to get response from everybody watching. Remember that the CIPD Coronavirus Hub is here for you as a resource, and we're adding things to it all the time. And this topic is going to be a really big one for us over the coming months. And last but not least, I want to flag our wellbeing helpline for our members in the UK and Ireland. With award-winning workplace wellbeing provider Health Assured, we are now providing CIPD members with free help and support via sessions with qualified therapists online or over the phone. So that is the housekeeping done. On to our topic for this afternoon. Now, it's been more than 6 months since the introduction of lockdown measures forced UK businesses to shut their doors and implement widespread home working. Many organisations responded rapidly in crisis mode, using quite short-term fixes. While this initial enforced home working experiment has proven largely successful, so we all know productivity hasn't fallen off a cliff after all, what are the implications for longer-term home working? What is the impact on employee mental, physical, and financial well-being? What does it mean for the pay and benefits deal? And what support should employers be offering their workforce in the short term over the coming colder and darker winter months ahead? In short, is there a blueprint for effective long-term home working? I'm sure if you've tuned into a lot of these webinars, you've got pretty used to seeing my sofa and poster of Danish chairs after the last 6 months. I think we've got 6 more months of that ahead of us, so lucky you. So that's what we're talking about this afternoon. We're going to hear from Johnny first. Johnny's going to set some of the context. He's going to talk about some CIPD research, and then Alan's going to run us through some of the legal things that we need to know. Then Lee's going to share some of her experience, and then we're going to move into Q&A. Please do get your questions in from the start, and we will take as many as we can. We had some submitted in advance, so I'll cover those as well. Don't leave them all until the last 10 minutes. If you put them in early, you're more likely to get them answered. So that's it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Johnny to kick us off. Over to you, Johnny.
Thanks very much, Katie. I think it's tempting to see change wherever you look in the pandemic, the sense that after COVID, nothing's ever going to be the same again. But of course, in many respects, I think that we will return to default pretty much as soon as we can, or will be taken over by other challenges like coming out of a recession or adapting to Brexit. Don't forget Brexit. So a question for how we work is, where do we genuinely think there's going to be long-term change from our experiences of the COVID pandemic? And for my money, I think even though it's not for everybody, an increase in home working is the most likely long-term change in how we work. I think we were primed to do it through developments in remote technology. So supporting technology had already advanced and people were more used to using it. So the whole experience was sort of relatively frictionless. And along with that, it become more socially acceptable. So the view that working from home is kind of one step away from shirking, I think that was less common. And COVID, in a way, just gave us that push to show that it could be done more widely. How much it will change in practice, we don't quite know, but we do have some ideas. So if we look at some of our survey research on the next slide, we can see that employers, this is recent research done over the summer, employers see that the proportion of home workers could roughly double overall. So you can see that here for both working from home all the time, which is the pink bars, and also people working regularly, that's a day a week or more. On the next slide, we can also see that employees' expectations are changing too. So employees have seen that through COVID, just how practical it can be to work from home. If you look at the green bar at the top, you can see that 1 in 3 UK workers are likely to request working from home more in the future. However, if you look at the orange bar there, it's also noticeable that 1 in 10 UK workers have been put off by the experience of working from home in the lockdown, and they're now less likely to work from home. The other thing that I draw from this graph is that it highlights that flexible working is not just about working from home. So if we look at the other green bars, you can see that we may see demand increase in other types of flexible working arrangements. So in particular, flexi time and compressed working hours. Moving on to the next slide. It's really important to recognise that if we look at this in the wider context of work-life balance and work hours, this is an area in which the UK is particularly poor at. So what you've got here is a list of a selection of OECD countries surveyed in 2015. And on that question about work-family interference, UK is near the bottom of the list. We know that many of us would like to reduce our hours. Typical commute time is sort of getting on for 4 hours a week, 6.5 hours a week in London. We know that this is an area that we're not very good at. Now, flexible working is clearly not a panacea. It can simply mean that you're juggling your time more, but it is a key way that we can manage our time to fit our needs. And we know from our work in the Good Work Index that we can that there is a big unmet demand in flexible working. So on the next slide, we have, sorry, I'm missing a slide there. We know from our work on the Good Work Index that about half of us, or a bit over half of us, work flexibly in some way or other. But 2/3 of us would like to work flexibly in a way that's not currently available. So there's clearly more we can do in this. What this slide shows is that COVID-19 has brought about change in a very unequal way so far. So we can see, as you know, you'd well expect, that manual and less skilled jobs are much less likely to be able to be working from home through the pandemic, and more likely to have been furloughed. And you can see a similar trend across industries. So it's retail, and in particular hospitality, where you see more furloughing, less working from home. Now, for many people in these situations, the number one priority is going to be basic job security. That's just a reality of living in a recession. But I think it's also worth noting that employers in the past have had quite a narrow view of who can work from home, who can't work from home in the past. And what the lockdown has showed is that many people who'd never been given this option before can work from home. So I think we should challenge ourselves, employers should challenge themselves to offer flexible working where possible. What's the next step? On the next slide, we need to think about how we can get the best out of virtual teams. And the following slide, what we did in May of this year was we conducted an evidence review summarising the body of research. And one of the main findings that we have is that the basic ingredients for successfully managing virtual teams are pretty much the same as face-to-face or collocated teams, but it's harder to get those factors in place. So, for example, especially when we look at knowledge-intensive businesses, which, let's face it, is many of us, it's clear expectations and role clarity within teams are even more important in virtual teams than they are in face-to-face teams, but they're harder to get. So it can mean that it's helpful to give a bit more direction over who's going to do what at what point. But on the other hand, social cohesion and trust are more important in virtual teams, and they're harder to build, and it's easy to undermine. So undermining trust can happen in virtual teams through procedures to monitor performance, for example. This has been seen quite conclusively in research. Equally, we see that virtual teams become more reliant on knowledge sharing, but knowledge sharing is harder to do. When we think about communications are often delayed. People give less information when they're communicating by email, and it's harder to interpret messages than it is when you're working with people face to face. So throughout these areas, there's a simple message that it takes more effort to manage virtual teams, but that extra effort is definitely worth it. We should, though, take a note of encouragement, which is that one of the great facilitators of managing virtual teams is having rich media and communications. So what we have now with Zoom or MS Teams or whichever platform you prefer is that we're much better equipped now to make the shift to virtual teams than we were before, even if people need a bit of training in how to make the best use of teleconferencing or video conferencing. And, things like home broadband can sometimes leave much to be desired because the upload speeds are not symmetrical with the download speeds and so on. We're basically in a good place. There are more considerations, and perhaps you can pick up on some of these in our discussion. Things like the knock-on effect of the nature of the employment relationship, pay, contracts. Potentially there's an opportunity for us as a society to become less London-centric. But I think I'll sum up now with the next slide to talk about the CIPD's message. So first of all, CIPD's got 3 crucial tests for the return to the workplace in the current climate. We ask, is it essential to return to work? Is it safe? And is it mutually agreed with workers? And we also firmly believe that employees should have day one rights to request flexible working, as flexible working is something that should be the norm rather than the exception. And I think with that, I will hand back to you, Katie.
Thanks very much for that, Johnny, and thanks everyone for starting to put questions in and comments. I've seen somebody saying that they decided in January to give up their office and to work from home. They did not expect to get the huge push in March to speed this up, but the office has already gone. So they've already made that decision. I wonder if we'll see more of that. I'm going to hand over to Alan now. Alan's going to look at the legal considerations that we've got to think about when we talk about making home working work for the long term. Over to you, Alan.
Thanks, Katie. I've got 10 minutes to give you a whistle-stop tour of the legal context. So there's a lot of slides to cover, and as Katie outlined, they're going to be available on the website. So I'll try and go through this as quickly as I can and try and answer some questions along the way. So next slide, please. So obviously we're going to talk about the legal right to work from home, and you can see from the slide there's a lot of considerations which Johnny covers really, really well. So next slide, please. So the legal right to work from home, I think the best advice, the best employee relations aspect that I can talk about is the point Johnny made about flexible working. Whilst employees don't have the automatic right to work from home, some do in terms of what's in the employment contract. I would deal with any request to work from home in the same way as the CIPD are pushing for day one rights. So whilst flexible working eligibility comes in at 26 weeks, the best advice is to deal with any request to work from home. And I saw one of the participants ask that question about the request to work from home as a flexible working request, because in that context, you're looking at both the business and the employees' reasons for that request. Next slide, please. And if you're looking for guidance in that area, CIPD's got some really helpful guidance, but I'd also call upon you to look at the Acas Code of Practice, which deals with the request to work flexibly, because that's what the future's going to hold for us in terms of working from home. Now, obviously, there's a time limit on that, and there's that 26-week rule we talked about earlier. But again, there's nothing preventing you as an employer from dealing with that from day one. There's nothing preventing you from dealing with a request to work from home as a request to work flexibly. And there's certain things the employee should be thinking about in terms of changing their working conditions. And at the moment, most employees are working from home, maybe not by mutual consent, but just because of the guidance that's come from government. But Johnny talks about that mutual consent and that trust relationship. So it's always good to get any type of agreement in writing. So we go to the next slide. It talks about the procedure. So it's obviously the employer wants to agree that request to work from home in the long term, but it should be mutually agreed. Ideally, it should be a meeting, ideally digitally. So we talk about what platforms are available. We've got Zoom, we've got LifeSight, we've got Microsoft Teams, we've got Skype. There's other forms of communication. You've even got WhatsApp calling, you've got FaceTime calling, but try and have that virtual face-to-face meeting to talk about the request. And obviously, if you can, record that meeting, confirm the discussion in writing, and allow the employee that right to appeal as well. There's no statutory right in these types of meetings to be accompanied, but the Acas Code of Practice talks about allowing the employee some type of accompaniment. It makes it more informal for them. And in the home place setting, you may have a family member available. Again, just talk to the employee about that. The next slide, please. Employees do have the right to refuse flexible working, and there are reasons available for refusal. And at the end of these slides, there's some guidance from employment tribunal decisions, some employment appeal tribunal decisions that I won't go into now. But as Johnny said, there's very little evidence in a lot of skilled and professional roles showing that people can't work from home. And the slide talks in detail about the reasons you can refuse those requests to work from home. You are going to hear from Lee talking about in context how it's worked for their organisation, and it'll be different for everyone. Next slide, please. We are starting to see some tribunal claims, not just dealing with refusals to be able to work from home, but that employment relationship breaking down in terms of the situation we find ourselves in. And always we find ourselves in a simple situation of what was discussed at the time. So therefore, having these formal meetings are important. Referring back to contemporaneous documentation, minutes of a meeting, a home working arrangement in writing makes it really clear on the expectation from all the parties. And it makes everyone clear of what's expected of them and why, and any concerns that both the employees got should be discussed in the application and the decision, and more so in that home working arrangement. Next slide, please. Let's just touch on the home working agreement. At the moment, most employment contracts in the UK relate to a statement of main terms or an employee handbook and employment contract. And it normally states a normal place of work, and it's normally an office-based location, but it may refer to a variation across the UK. A home working agreement takes that a step further. It either provides a short-term, medium or long-term arrangement as to what expectation we've got. And we should be asking our employees and our colleagues to review and sign that, so it's very clear. A lot of small employees that I speak to are a bit in limbo at the moment. They don't necessarily know where this is going to end up. The employee thinks it's going to be permanent because it's working really well for them. The employee thinks it's government guidance or that the place of work isn't COVID secure. So there are little steps we can take to make sure that there's an end date or a review date, which is sure about the expectations about a safe place of work at home. There's obviously lone working to consider. There's working time to consider, and we're going to cover that a little bit later in these slides. The next slide, please. Working hours. Subject to what happens with Brexit or transition. The UK Cabinet Office told me the other day I should be calling it. I'm not allowed to call it Brexit. They'll be telling me. So transition period. So during transition, we need to be thinking about opt-out agreements. So at the moment, employees have the right to agree through mutual consent and opt out of 48 hours. But we need to be thinking about that. So again, if they're working from home, there's been a bit of an expectation that people feel obliged to work longer hours. That shouldn't be the case. But if they are, working hours should be agreed. And if they are beyond 48 hours, they should be looking at a signed opt-out agreement. Again, bearing in mind that may be changing with the working time regulations. Next slide, please. I think I've said this in all the slides so far. Keeping records, not just for the employee's benefit, but for the employee's benefit. Really concerned at the moment that a lot of employees are working extra hours. They feel obligated. The distinction between home and work is very much blurred at the moment. And I'll just give you one example. A technology that we use is something called Blip, where employees check in and check out. It's very much about work-life balance. It forces them to check in and check out. It does give the employee a record, which is important both for the UK and Ireland in terms of being able to show working time obligations. And even in the UK, since March, we've seen 1.6 million uses of that application. But it shouldn't be used as a way of monitoring employees. It is about that checking in and checking out. And also this challenge of home-based workers in the professional and skilled roles feeling they have to demonstrate what they're doing. That's not the case. So again, it is important to keep records of what the home working arrangement is, what the balance is, and also what hours they're doing. Next slide, please. Change in pay. I think that was one of the questions that was asked at the outset in terms of some employees may have a London allowance. Some employees may have some support on commuting costs. And I think, again, as part of this home working arrangement, it's through mutual consent. That's a discussion to be had. But at the moment, you have no legal right to change those terms and conditions unless they're through mutual consent. There's been a little bit of talk, especially in the SME community that we talk to, 30,000 of them, that there's an opportunity to review pay and reward. It should be done through consent. That sort of want from an employee to look at cost during COVID is obviously apparent, but those employees entered into that employment relationship with a very clear understanding of their total reward package. So you need to be careful when looking at that. And again, there may be an imbalance when we do have some employees wishing to return to work either through technology limitations or that issue we talked about earlier about isolation. I'm in work today partly because of my internet connection in a new home, and partly there's a check-in of those IT professionals who are in work today. So you need to think about that when you look at the total reward balance. Next slide, please. I don't like the word monitoring staff from home, but it seems to come up, so hit it on the head. A lot of small employees use that type of terminology. You do have the opportunity to monitor usage through technology, but it should be through consent. It should be very much balanced. There's a German case, I think it came out yesterday with H&M, that was very much onerous, both on monitoring and GDPR obligations. They went too far. It's quite a big fine, but I think Johnny covered it earlier. There's also an issue in terms of the employment relationship about trust, and it shouldn't be that we don't trust staff at home. It may just be a case of how we perform or report on that performance, and it shouldn't be about how many calls or video they do. We should already have a performance framework in place, and if we don't, again, embellish that in terms of the home working arrangement. Next slide, please. Misconduct from work has never been an issue before because everyone's been based on work. I can only give you anecdotal small issues. Calls going in maybe into a later evening where employees have children at home, they've done split shifts, they've needed to have breaks, half-day annual leave, dependence leave, unpaid leave, and that may have impacted. I think of one example where they've worked an evening shift and maybe they've had a glass of wine with dinner, and there's been a bit of a challenge there. So just reminding employees that the home-based environment, there need to be a bit of degree of flexibility. But when this becomes a long-term arrangement, it's just a normal place of work. And next slide, please. Bringing staff back to work, if that would ever to happen, how to deal with that. But again, if the home-working relationship is agreed, if that flexibility is there, it should be discussed in the home-working arrangement. If there's a need to work from home, it should be there now. If there's a place or need to work from the office now, it should be now. It shouldn't be based on government guidance. There should be a need or want to be discussed now. We're not going to talk about those rare occurrences where there may be a need for disciplinary action if an employee refuses to return to the office. But remember, returning to the office is the office. It's not returning to work. They're already at work now. Next slide, please. So in summary, there's some challenges with remote management. There's fair procedures when dealing with employees from home. There's an issue about lone working, check-in, check-out, display screen equipment, health and safety, data protection, confidentiality. What you're discussing, what you're monitoring needs to be in the home working agreement. And engagement and employee well-being. We're lucky that as CIPD members, we have the benefit of the Health Assured helpline, the digital app. But what resource are you giving to your employees for isolation and mental health? It's really, really important. And the benefits of that lack of travel is important. My commute is 10 to 15 hours a week. You can tell from my accent. That background is in Manchester. So that is Manchester, but I live closer to Liverpool. Work-life balance is massively improved. You are getting increased working hours, but again, you need to check out with that. It's probably going too far. There's a money saving to the employee that shouldn't need to be repaid to the employer. And engagement and productivity for some at home. I think Katie, for once, I might be on time. So that was a whistle-stop tour. And back to Katie.
That was a huge whistle-stop tour. Thank you. You covered so many bases there. Lots of questions coming in, and we're going to address those shortly. Also, one of my colleagues has shared the check-in, check-out app that Alan mentioned. I saw some people were asking about that in the chat. And these slides will be available to download, so you can digest them at your leisure later, including those that we didn't get through. So before we go into Q&A, I'd like to invite Lee to share some of her experiences at Enterprise. Over to you, Lee.
Great, thank you, Katie. Well, for us, it's like a lot of you out there, we had to move a lot of employees home really quickly. And Katie mentioned that we did have a heritage or several departments that were home workers. And so we've had a strong program of home working in our call centers for some time. But really for us at Enterprise, a lot of our employees are customer facing. So we run around 450 branches. It's a retail operation. And so we have this really mix of administrative employees that have the potential to work from home. And then how do we service our customers, and how do we bridge all those gaps together? So at the beginning of March, we had a few hundred dedicated home workers and probably a couple of hundred more people that were flexible in, sometimes they worked from the office, sometimes they worked from home. And then we had countless number of people on what we call an alternative work arrangement. They're just minor adjustments to their schedule, but we really don't document it. They work it out with their manager and we go from there. But, clearly in mid-March, we had to move another several hundred employees home from our administrative teams really quickly. And it's, we had the same challenges that a lot of people, how do we make sure this team is, the technology is secure? A lot of people didn't have, they had dedicated PCs at work, not laptop technology. How do we make sure they have proper technology to do their job? So really we were going through all of the same challenges that many people have, the personal equipment challenge, the Wi-Fi connectivity challenge. How do we deal with those pieces? So immediately we created an interim home working team that was a little bit different, or I would say a work from home team, not a home working team. We already had that. There was their job was to really address some of these challenges and really to bring it together. And they introduced this concept called the 3 C's, cooperation, coordination, and communication. You can tell health and safety was involved there with the 3 C's. But this really helped us create an environment that we were being really collaborative about what we were hearing. We were surveying our employees to understand their needs and where their challenges were. We were working really closely with our IT department. I mean, everybody knows everybody wanted equipment at the same time, and that can be a challenge. And then how did we run some of these DSE assessments and make sure that we had proper, line of sight, so to speak, there. So this interim policy was created, but we had our own challenges. I mean, one of the first challenges is, we had so many different levels of employees. The slide that Johnny showed, really demonstrated how that works. And everybody had a different, maybe, challenge there. Children needing homeschooling. Well, the hours allowed parents to do that, but was it enough for them? And while this didn't really come up as part of our homeworking policy, one of the best, I think, initiatives that we implemented were 10 paid emergency leave days early in the crisis. And we allowed people that were ill, they could use it for COVID illness, COVID caretaking, or school situations. So we could give our employees a little assurance there, and that helped in that respect. But we also had a lot of our young employees who are at the bottom of the pecking order in their home. They didn't have an ideal place to work. So some of our apprentices, maybe their mom, their dad, their older brother or sister, got first dibs on the Wi-Fi or the technology. And so they found that sometimes really difficult. In fact, some of these, this group of people were like, when can we come back to the office? And then just the technology, we didn't even have teams at that time. We had very few people in our company. So we had to really upskill a lot of people really quick. I was joking in the beginning, people didn't turn on their camera for meetings, and we were like, okay, this is virtual now. let's get into the system. So we had some really basic issues we had to address. I mean, people didn't know they had to leave their computer on at work to remote into their technology. So you can just kind of see a lot of the same, I'm sure, challenges in your organization. From a mental health perspective, we needed to make sure that we were reaching out and making sure that people understood where they could go and be signposted for help or for advice. So that whole making sure that and reminding people of their benefits was a really important part of that. And our culture really shifted. But it goes back to some of the things we've mentioned before, the trust. We've now moved from a work from home policy to we're creating a work from anywhere cross-border policy. Now that comes with its own challenges, tax implications, but that can just show you how quickly people can move that thought process, where people were sometimes reluctant for certain roles or certain departments to work from home. And so we're really, I think, moving in the right direction. And I think that probably we can tell by our employees around 60 to 65% really that are in roles that can work from home do want this hybrid model for the future. So we've got to really think about how that works as we start bringing people back. Because alternatively, we had about 20% of people that really want to be back into the office every day. So we really have to build on that. And, it's really, for us, it's how do we continue to make it a fun, inclusive environment? We just had our employee opinion survey, and we can tell that we're doing some things well, but we've got to really explore that virtual engagement, and we need more. We may need to do more there. And so some of the things that we have done that have been really impactful are some listening sessions and talking about different topical issues that might be going on in the workplace or in society in general. And those have proven to be popular. But it's definitely an evolution, and it's, we're on a journey. So that's just a little whistle stop tour about what we've been experiencing since March.
Thank you very much for that, Lee. Can I invite Alan and Johnny to take yourselves off mute, and you, Lee, everybody off mute, or I'll be saying you're on mute multiple times in the Q&A. I'm going to go to questions. We've had a lot that are quite similar, so I'll group them together. So quite a few around what is the role of employers, or what are employers kind of compelled to do around setting people up to work from home. So whether that is providing allowances for people to be able to buy the equipment to set themselves up to work from home, what that means around things like claiming back from HMRC, all those kind of things as we move into working longer term. So Alan, just from a legal perspective, what is the duty of care from an employer when it comes to setting people up to work from home effectively and safely?
We're getting into health and safety law rather than employment law. So it's been a while. In terms of the health and safety of work, obviously the employer has to provide a safe place of work, and the home is a safe place of work. The most practical and simple steps is to ask the employee, either with guidance from a health and safety professional or a HR professional who's got support, is to complete 2 types of assessment, which are a display screen equipment assessment, which is the old adage of where's your screen, is it safe? And obviously they have to provide, as the employer, tools to make sure that they've got the correct screen, they're not working from a laptop, the screen's the right height. And then there's also an office-based risk assessment, which is the chair, the desk. A lot of employees in the short term were working from sofas. A lot of employers have allowed employees to take their company chair home, like the chair I'm sitting on now. And some have provided a contribution. I think I saw in one of the chats, someone said about a notional figure of £100 or £200. I think a lot of employers are now offering that. And the small employers that we're speaking to, we're saying you should be looking to provide a budget. The HMRC gives some taxable relief to that. I'd be speaking to your finance teams, but I think £100 to provide the IKEA type of basic workstation. I think most employees will need a screen as well as a laptop, a headset in terms of DSE and such like. I think on the next session, if you want to let me know, I can get one of our health and safety professionals on the call as well to help out. I don't know if Lee's got to be there.
Thank you very much, Alan. And the figure I hear most cited when I talk to HRDs about this is £250 as the allowance. Lee, have you set people up? And what about your long-term home workers? Were they given an allowance to set themselves up?
Well, our long-term home workers, we already had a program. And basically, when we would hire them, they came with their equipment and with their own devices. Now, we're rethinking everything right now because I think it's a good time to just review and make sure that everything's still fit for purpose. So we haven't really changed that policy yet, but we are looking at different things. I think the point that Alan made about being flexible, so we have allowed people to come get their work equipment and take it home, or in some cases we've gotten, that to them, a chair, for example. I think, everybody has the story of, and probably a lot of people on the phone, if we're really thinking, are we sitting in a proper office chair right now? I'm not sure we could all tick that box. And so we've really tried to be as flexible and address things right now in a really personable way. And as we start to evolve back into the workplace and see where that's going,
Thank you.
We're still making decisions.
Yeah, quite a lot of questions and discussion about what needs to be a contractual change versus what is part of a agile working kind of policy. Johnny, any thoughts on what needs to or should change long term in terms of kind of contracts and what can be done on a kind of trust basis?
I think, as Alan's already said, in terms of providing an office environment that's suitable, there's a duty of care for employers to make sure that is the case. I noticed one of the comments or questions coming in saying, what about people who can't work from home and are looking to work in an office which is then closed? And I think that's a difficult but serious conversation that needs to take place. So I think there could be some duty of care there for employers to make allowances for people to come into the office if that's what they need. So in terms of contracts changing, and at what point do you need to change a contract if someone's working sort of half time at home or 80% at home? Alan may be able to advise on that more better than me. But I think that what's likely to change over the medium or longer term is that the way in which employment relationships are set up is slightly different, so that we can see we'll see more jobs which are home-based from the off, or more jobs which allow for that or require that. And I think that is likely to change all sorts of dynamics of how we work and contractual relationships. I think it is good to get those things in writing if you can, both from the point of view of what the employer's duty of care is, and from the point of view of what, where employees can or are required to work. So I think, Alan made the very basic point that get stuff in writing, have the conversations. From a people management point of view, it's really important to show that you're supportive, to show that you're listening, to show that you're working in consultation with employees. You're not just saying, there's the memo, that's what you've got to do now. It's got to be a two-way conversation.
Thanks, Johnny. Alan, can I ask you to expand on what the legal obligations are there?
Just on another point, the CIPD website's got a really good homeworking survey questionnaire, which is a good starting position. I think one of the other questions about what's available on the premium service of HR Inform. I think the challenge with the employment contract is it's always seen as sort of a backstop, insofar as that it's seen as what's the legal framework for allowing working from home, and what obligations for pay, and is it safe or not. The best conversations are those that are either at the offer of employment or when home working takes place. So that home working arrangement about what we're going to provide you, what expectations you've got, but it's got to be by mutual consent, because at the moment, a lot of employees are working from either goodwill, or the employers are working from goodwill. So there's we're starting to get a situation of custom and practice, which means in employment law that what we've done for so long becomes permanent, and therefore employees have, through custom and practice through a period of time, become home workers, and that's now their normal place of work. In the same way that if I wasn't traveling to Manchester today and I stayed at home in Liverpool for the next 2 years, that would become my place of work. Same with pay, same with hours. So there's definitely a need and a call out to get that home working arrangement in writing. That becomes an addendum, an amendment to that statement of main terms or that contract of employment.
Thank you, Alan. Lee, we had a question about how employers are combating the loneliness from colleagues as some of the social bonds of the workplace are broken. Can you give any insight into what you've done at Enterprise to keep people feeling connected?
Well, one of the things that we did, and I think this was something a little different than we had done in the past, is particularly after Black Lives Matter, we did some listening sessions with our employees. So it was really just kind of changing up maybe how we would approach a topic and inviting people to call in and have a chat with the MD. Or we've done some different things around getting webinars or information out at different times on different topics. And we can kind of, through the technology, we can do this and invite people to do it more on a national basis, where before it was probably more regionally based. And so people can actually hear views from the top or things like that. But then we've seen some great examples, and these are just like things I'm sure we're all doing: pub quizzes, happy hours, lunches. In the beginning, the first week out, every Friday meeting, one team would have a best hat day. Everybody would wear a hat, and they would put it out on Twitter and our internal social media. So we've used that a lot more to kind of leverage what people are doing and sharing, their accomplishments that way. But it's really trying to connect people on projects in a different way, and bringing people in. So I think that it's really similar to what you would do to build engagement other ways, but I think it's really, our managers are still trying to figure out, how do I do that virtually? How do I build a relationship with a new employee?
And have you found any technology or tools particularly useful? Somebody's asked about what's available out there.
I think if I said, we were still implementing Teams in the beginning, so I'm not sure I would be the best person to talk about technology. But all joking aside, I think one of the things that we did, we were also going through a new HR system integration, and we were still kind of in the implementation phases at the beginning, and just some little things that we did about where we put things on the landing page to have everybody go through that system, so everybody knows where different platforms are that sounds really simple, but we had people going on to different places and just trying to put everything in, one central place where they could see everything that they could use to make their workday more useful.
Thank you. Johnny, on that technology point, is there anything that you've seen working particularly well and enabling the better virtual teams?
I think helping people get to grips with the likes of video conferencing is just a very basic thing. I don't think we should assume, you still have people on video conferences kind of like that, where you just sort of see their forehead, or you can't hear them properly. Or I think, just a very basic bit of training on how people can get up and running. Someone the other day suggested to me, why don't you stick your Ethernet cable in if your Wi-Fi's connections are not very fast? And I thought, blimey, I'd not thought of that before. So I, stuck in an Ethernet cable, and lo and behold, my internet was working more quickly. So I think there's various just basic training that we can help people with so that they can have better quality interactions. It's that we need to get as close to face-to-face interactions as possible. So that's about the quality of video conferencing. I think that it's also important to make sure that there's a kind of level playing field, for want of a better phrase, that if you've got some people in the office having a face-to-face meeting and you've got some people at home who would be dialing in, just make everyone dialing in. And if you've got some people who might not have a webcam, then think about making it a telephone call instead. So I think trying to have meetings in which everyone can contribute equally, I think, is really important too.
I think that's a really interesting point about that kind of digital fluency that we've all assumed that everybody has because we've been doing this for 6 months, but just kind of getting people up to speed with the basics is probably something that a lot of organizations could still consider, because I'm still seeing a lot of people with only their foreheads getting in there.
But we are in so much of a better place than we were even just a few years ago. When I had my leg implanted sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and it struck me at that point just how well I could take part in office life through video conferencing, and that hadn't been the case before. We have IT services who can log on to your computer with a click of a couple of buttons. We're really well equipped, and there's a lot to be gained, I think, in this.
So Lee, did you have a point?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and somebody I think put this in the comments, one of our teams is trying a new app called Teacup, I believe, and they've had some really good feedback from it, so we may look to do that. So there are some really innovative things out there, but one thing, we went to a lot of our partners and we said, what can you do for us? How can you help us take this virtual experience and really make it more real for our employees, beneficial? And so we had a lot of, like, for example, Talking Talent, our parental coaching company that we use. They've helped us take everything virtually, and so our participation rates have gone up there. We had another company that we used that are really helping us with some basic, information about elder care, self-care, just really get signposting people to different points. And so your EAPs may be a really good source too to help with that virtual experience.
Thank you. Alan, question for you from Angela. Do you feel there will be many grievances and disputes later this year, or perhaps from spring 21, when there may be a push by employers for people to return to the office or workplace? If so, what's your guidance for being prepared and reducing the number of potential complaints?
We saw on the last round of government guidance urging people to go back to work, there's sort of a disconnect from those who had to remain in work and low skill roles not being sort of recognised for that. And we saw grievances from those being asked to come back from work for no other reason than government guidance when they were working very well at home. I know I keep on stressing the point, and again, we'll obviously ensure that HR and Form have got some model guidance. And again, just to call out, you've all got access to the free CIPD Employment Law Helpline, where you can get more guidance much longer and probably quicker than I can give it. But I think that home working arrangement is really important to set the context of the relationship now and what's expected from them. Is there an end date on it? Is it because of technology? Is it because of the role? Why do we require them back to work at any stage in the future, and have those conversations now. It's the currency's there now. It shouldn't be something that's led by government. The relationships between the employer and the employee, and that contract is fluid. It's not what's written in stone 2 years ago when that employee started, but it's how that evolves. So it's very much about grievances from what I've seen over the last 20 years in employee relations, because that expectation or level playing field doesn't exist. The obligations between the parties aren't always clear, and that fluidity of relationship varies day by day, and those check-ins and those relationships and those agreements in writing need to stay current, and that should avoid grievances. And if they do occur, you can go back to that contemporaneous document, email or recording where it was discussed and agreed.
Thank you. I see someone.
I think it needs to come back as well to just to that very fundamental point that we need to do things which are mutually agreed. So for the current environment, if someone can't work at home but you've closed the office, can you find another mutually agreed solution, like working in a co-working space? Further down the line, is it 80% or 50% working at home? Mutually agree it. Go through these genuine conversations where you can say what the business needs are and what people's individual needs are, and find a way that works.
And talking about that kind of balance of home versus office and that blended approach you were talking about, Lee, are you thinking that you will have a kind of 2 days in, 3 days out, or anything kind of set in stone, or will it be up to people to decide with their managers?
Well, we've been consulting with our employees a lot about what they want and what they see for the future. And we were well on our journey for a return to work plan. I mean, we had even released all of our videos about how to come back to the office safely. And but I do think people will want that hybrid model. And that's why we've gone to this work from anywhere. Let's just really harness, the support and the movement, and really how do we continue to make this a better, more flexible workplace. Like I said, a lot of our roles are customer facing. Those are not available to work from home because we need to service our customers. But whenever we can, whatever opportunity we have to make the workplace more flexible for our employees and the productivity's there, why wouldn't we take advantage of it?
And would you be letting people work from anywhere abroad? We've had a few people discussing that in the chat.
Well, we are putting, the policy is actually called, I've got it right here, the cross-border policy. Now, there are tax implications. This is the difficult thing. I mean, there are clear tax implications, and can you work in do you have the ability? There's limited number of days. So it's going to be really prescriptive there. But I think the concept is, let's just be as flexible as we can. We're here, we've come. I guess one thing that I think is a big challenge is I could even start to see this with the return to work. Certain people, almost their mindset changing back. Well, we need to be back in an office. So I think we just need to make sure that we, really capture this moment and drive it forward.
And just before I leave you and go on to somebody else, somebody's just put into the Q&A that they really like the idea of this working from anywhere, but from a contractual point of view, what do you class the work location to be for these people?
We haven't gotten there yet. Like I said, this is our policy for the future. But I think what we would probably do is still class them in their, they would still be domicile and everything, and class them in their normal corporate or administrative office, and then do some type of, in my mind, I'm thinking addendum. There would be some reporting requirements about where people would need to work, and probably a more robust process approval with that, just so we know where people are, and they're not just on holiday, for example.
Thank you. Alan, can I ask you to add in on that? We've had quite a few comments about this working abroad. Unmute yourself. We almost got 6 minutes left, Alan. Could have got through.
I think the point Lee made about the tax implication, there's also a very apparent employment law issue about places of work, and there's a lot of case law which talks about pilots, for example, who sort of travel from a base, let's say in Heathrow, and work so many days abroad or have stay over days abroad. So there's a massive implication of employment legislation of where their employment jurisdiction is, not just from a tax point of view, but also jurisdiction if you wanted to bring an employment tribunal claim, a claim about employment rights. We're talking about flexible working. That employee put a request in for flexible working, but we're spending 9 months abroad, do they even have the legal opportunity to use UK legislation? So there's very much a challenge there, and I don't think it's been well tested, other than in that previous situation of pilots being abroad and where was their normal place of work, not just from a tax perspective, but in terms of control as well.
Yeah. And keep in mind, you probably would be limited to how many days you could do that per year. So it would be a very short window, but it does give people back to that flexibility piece.
Definitely a lot to work through there. We are running out of time. I'm just going to ask a couple more quick ones. Obviously, we're going into winter. It's going to be cold. We're all going to be, if we are home working now, we're going to be sitting in our homes. We're going to have to be paying a lot more for heating. We've got some questions about is it an employer's responsibility to pay any more of that? And how do you deal with if you're getting any requests from employees to help them out in that space? And Alan, from your perspective?
Well, again, you're getting into my health and safety legislation. From memory, there is no legal minimum on how cold a workplace can be. So just dealing with that practical situation, the law, the Factories Act, which it originally comes from, is about a workplace, I think, being too hot or certainly being too cold. I don't think many homes will be in a situation where they'll be at that really cold temperature, just because we all go home of an evening and we don't want our pipes freezing. So I think the law talks about in health and safety regulation about extremities. So I think the challenge that employees will face is there'll be no claim that the home workplace is so cold or so warm that the employee's got an obligation that it's no longer safe. I think there's practical considerations about that allowance and having that allowance to be all encompassing. If it's a regular allowance, if it's a one-off allowance, putting that into place. But again, if it was a new working relationship, you would be saying to the employee, you need to have a safe, warm and able environment, and therefore that situation wouldn't occur. So if it is going to become a permanent place of work, then it's up to the employee to make that requirement. It's not the employer forcing them to work from home. And if the employee wants to continue working from home, I think my advice is to have that home working arrangement to say you're making that available, in the same way that you require the employee to maybe be smart or find a safe way of getting to work. The employee's not got an obligation to provide the uniform normally or the vehicle, depending on what the work role is.
Thank you. And Johnny, from a people management perspective, any advice on dealing with if you're asked for stuff like that you might consider not to be your responsibility to deal with as an employer?
We thinking specifically about the allowances for
allowances for heating bills, for Wi-Fi, that kind of thing?
I think it's a difficult one. I mean, I think it will depend. Most employment contracts may not cover it. You know, if we're thinking more broadly about allowances and pay, I think the biggest consideration is going to be commuting costs. So I understand that on the grapevine, there's been some discussion in HR circles about basically, can I reduce people's pay because they're not having to pay for commuting costs? Now, unless you have that baked into an employment contract, you're not going to be able to easily, at least, and certainly not safely, just take a cut saying this is what I reckon you were spending on commuting and I'm going to pay you less. But I think the longer term implications, we may see something playing out there. So we may see that with new jobs coming up, that there is a sort of a London weighting that's not applied, or there's not the same allowances made for commuting costs or London living or whatever. And I would imagine that those costs will outstrip any costs that people need to pay for heating and so on. I think if employers can give their workers allowances in the meantime for the current temporary situation, then I think that's great. I don't think that it's going to be easy to just change by fiat people's employment contracts, certainly if it's talking about reducing pay. But I do think over the longer term we might see changes. But there's really positive things about this too. That if more people are working from home, this could mean that fewer people have to come and live in the big smoke. And I think, we see, for example, one of the major, if not the major generational differences is in housing equity. So young people, pressure to move to London. What are they going to do? They're going to buy a shoebox at some extortionate price. That's all they can afford. Whereas if we've got more home working, then we may be less London centric as a society. People may be able to, live other parts of the country. And I think that there are some issues to iron through, but there are also some opportunities with regarding to, pay and income and all of that.
Thank you, Johnny. I'm going to have to wrap it up there, but it's nice to finish on a positive note about the opportunities to come. Thank you so much, Johnny, Alan, and Lee, for taking part and for sharing your insight and experiences. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching, for all your questions, and it's also great to see you sharing with each other on the chat as well. It just makes it a much more interactive experience. A reminder that the webinar and the slides will be available later. As Alan said, we'll explore with HR Inform what kind of resources we're able to add. And if you keep visiting the CIPD Coronavirus Hub, everything will be appearing there as we add more content. We'll be back on the 15th of October with a session about redundancies and how to get them right and make them as humane and people-centred as possible. So do come along to that if that's something that you're considering as an organisation. But that is it from us for now. I hope you found it useful, and we shall see you next time. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.